Welcome to the Guide, Exile. Back in my Beginner's Guide series, I touched upon many of the primary and secondary defensive layers that can be used in Path of Exile, such as armor and block. Here I would like to go into more detail about these defensive layers, and more importantly, the order that they apply, which can greatly change the damage that you take. Defensive layers are very important to consider when building a character in Path of Exile. It is possible to make a successful character utilizing none or just a couple of these layers, but it becomes all the more difficult to survive in the endgame without them, requiring high levels of mechanical play and understanding a few deaths will happen here and there. I generally like to make my characters with a modest selection of defensive layers to ensure that I have some wiggle room when it comes to receiving damage. This generally consists of a primary defense like armor or evasion, a secondary defense like block or dodge, and a few defensive utility flasks that provide further mitigation or damage shift. To start, we will look at the first layer of defense, prevention. Damage prevention is as simple and great as it sounds. You completely prevent the source of incoming damage by 100%. This is achieved through evasion, dodge, and block. These preventions will only work on hit-based damage and not damage over time attacks. The first to roll will be your chance to evade enemy attacks. Evasion only works against attacks, so you will not be able to evade spells. Evasion is calculated in the following manner. Evasion can be gained through innate defense on gear, flasks such as a Jade, Grace Aura, and Blind, along with many other modifying sources. It is important to note that Blind will reduce an enemy's chance to hit, effectively increasing your evasion by 50% if you had none previously. So making use of a Stimnite Flask for the smoke cloud that applies Blind in a very close range is very powerful. Evasion has a low cap of 5% chance to evade and a top end cap of 95% chance to evade. However, evasion has entropy, where you will get hit eventually no matter what. Every time an attack is evaded, its chance to evade is added to a counter. Once that counter reaches a value of 100, the player is then struck by the incoming attack and the counter is reset. The second roll to critical strike chance is not added to this counter. If evasion fails, the next prevention method to be checked is dodge. Dodge comes in two forms, attack dodge and spell dodge. As stated in their names, each type of dodge will only work on the respective damage sources. Dodge is pseudo-random, meaning that dodging hits can be chained indefinitely if you are lucky. If you successfully dodge, you are not hit, thus you will not trigger any on-hit mechanics. Dodge has no lower cap, but has an upper default cap of 75%. Dodge can be acquired from the passive tree via acrobatics and phase acrobatics, ascendancies, implicit and explicit affixes on evasion-based gear, flasks, and unique items such as ItsRainingMyMuns steps. If complete damage evasion and dodge fails, the incoming damage can then be blocked, effectively mitigating the hit by 100%, but still resulting in you getting hit. Just like dodge, block comes in attack block and spell block. As stated in their names, each type of block will only work on the respective damage sources. All block is pseudo-random and is not entropy-based, meaning that blocking hits can be chained indefinitely if you are that lucky. If you successfully block, you will be hit, so on-hit triggers can still occur, such as the Juggernaut's unflinching ascendancy node. Because of this, if a hit were to stun you originally, there will be a block animation played, effectively stunning your character. Block has no lower cap, but has an upper default cap of 75%. Attack block can be gained by using a shield, staff, or dual-wielding weapons, as well as additional percentage block chance from the passive tree, ascendancies, and unique items. Spell block is not provided as an innate stat, like attack block with shields or weapons, and must be obtained by other methods. Spell block can be acquired from the passive tree, ascendancies such as the Gladiator that provides 100% of attack block applied to spells, and unique items that apply a percentage of attack block to spells. If these three damage preventions have been passed, the damage can then be shifted before it is mitigated. Here, damage can be shifted from one type to another. This is generally in the form of shifting physical damage to elemental damage, as seen with items like the Cloak of Flame, Lightning Coil, and Taste of Hate. However, there are some other items like the Crystal Vault which shift one elemental damage to another element. The reason shifting physical damage to elements is strong is that elemental resistances are flat reductions to damage and are already at 75% out of 100% reduction with capped resistances, and scale exponentially per maximum resistance added to it. This scaling can be better understood in my elemental and damages resistance video. With the damage shifted to one element, you can then make more effective use of maximum resistance to that element. Now with all the preventions and shifts that have been completed, we must mitigate the remaining incoming damage. Now prior to any mitigations, but after damage shift, incoming damage could be avoided, much like block. This is really only seen as a special modifier on unique items such as the glitter disc. Even though you avoid the damage, it will still count as a hit like block, allowing on-hit triggers to occur. Now for mitigations, there are two main damage mitigations, elemental and chaos resistance and physical damage reduction. Elemental and chaos will be mitigated by their respective resistances, just as seen in the elemental and damage resistance video, mitigating by the percent of the active resistance you have within your character defense tab from the incoming damage. Physical is a bit more complicated with many different sources of mitigation and variable functions. Ultimately, it will be mitigated by the sum of all percentage physical damage reduction sources. These include armor and flat reduction sources. Armor can be gained from sources such as armor from innate gear and granite flasks. Armor will only mitigate physical hit damage from attacks or spells, not damage over time, and has variable damage reduction based on the initial hit, as seen in this equation. As we can see, the higher the hit, the less that is mitigated. Armor is most effective for small to medium hits from general enemies rather than large hits from bosses, unless you stack it very high. This also leads to many confusions with the character defense tab, as armor's estimated physical reduction is only calculated for an average mob's damage of the same level as you. So as you level up, this number will lower unless you gain more armor. It also does not account for large hits from stronger monsters such as bosses, which can lower this number drastically. So be very aware that if your character defense tab reads 90% physical damage reduction and you are using armor, that you will most certainly not mitigate all of the incoming physical damage by that amount. Armor's physical damage reduction will always be based on the initial physical hit, after shifts but before other physical mitigation reductions. Flat physical reduction sources are any sources that include the line percentage additional physical damage reduction, or percentage physical reduction. These include endurance charges, basalt flask, passives, pantheons, and many different sources. These are powerful as they will apply the exact amount of percentage reduction that they read, regardless of the incoming damage, and work on hits and damage over time. These percentage flat reductions will be summed with armor's calculated percentage physical reduction and applied to the incoming damage. After these mitigations have been applied, there will be a final calculation of damage taken modifiers before we get the final damage received. Damage taken modifiers are applied last and in a certain order. There are the following damage takens. X damage taken from Y is the first to be applied and removes a flat amount listed from the respective mitigated incoming damage. This is something like -7 physical damage taken from attacks, as seen on the unique chest Ashrend. These take a simple flat number from the mitigated source and are generally not very impactful for most deadly hits. Next is percentage increased and reduced damage taken. These can be found on items and buffs such as Abyssus, Fortify, Shock, and many more. All of these sources will be added together and then multiplied against the mitigated damage number after the damage taken from Y. Finally is the percentage more and less damage taken. This can be found on effects such as Arctic Armor, Kintsugi, and Storm Barrier. Here every one of the more and less damage taken sources will be multiplied together rather than added, and then multiplied against the final damage mitigation number from percentage increased and reduced damage taken. It is important to note that after seeing the order of operations here, that buffs like Fortify and Arctic Armor do not take the pure percentage reduction that they read from the original source, but rather a percentage off near the final mitigated number. This is a common misconception people will come across when reading these effects. We will explore this more in the example later in the guide. With all of the modifiers applied to our incoming damage, we will now take the final damage and spread it amongst all of our resources accordingly. All non-chaos damage will be first applied to any energy shield that you have until it is depleted. The remaining damage will then apply to life until it is depleted. All chaos damage will bypass energy shield and apply to life until it is depleted. If chaos inoculation has been taken, you will take no chaos damage. If Shavron's wrappings or Solaris Lorica are being used, then chaos damage will not bypass energy shield, but will then deplete energy shield. If you have taken Mind over Matter, and energy shield is depleted, a percentage of the remaining damage is applied to mana as well as life until depleted. If mana is depleted, then the remaining damage will be taken from life. If energy shield is not depleted, only percentage chaos damage will be applied to mana as well as life, if no mechanics are used to keep damage from going past energy shield. To get a good grasp on how all incoming damage is mitigated, let's go through an example. Let's say we have the following stats, buffs, and items. Now let's say we get hit with a hybrid damage hit that strikes us for the following amount of damage. Now without any mitigations we would surely die from this hit, but let's look at how far the damage is mitigated by our defenses. First we will check to prevent the damage by means of evasion, block, or dodge. For this example, we are assuming that we have none of these stats for simplicity, since they would completely remove the latter parts of the calculation. That is not to say that these prevention methods are not valuable, they are in fact highly recommended to get, but for this example they would be meaningless. So since we did not prevent any damage, we will now move on to damage shift. We have two items that will do this, Lightning Coil and Taste of Hate. These shift a percentage of the incoming physical damage to elemental damage, for a more reliable and flat mitigation. So after we shift their damage, we will now have the following incoming damage. With all the damage shifted, we can now mitigate it. Physical damage will be mitigated by armor and reduced by physical damage modifiers, while elemental damage will be mitigated by resistances. First, we will do the elemental damage. We are assuming that we have capped elemental resistances plus the maximum resistance bonus from Taste of Hate. This means that we will have 75% fire and lightning resistance and 81 cold resistance for the following reductions. Again, elemental resistances are linear mitigation, in that they will always mitigate by the number that they read regardless of the incoming hit damage. This makes them much more efficient than armor for physical damage, and much easier to bring higher into its cap than physical damage reductions. This is why damage shifting from physical to elemental can be so powerful. For physical damage, we will have to account for armor first. As stated before, this calculation is based on the original hit after damage shifts, but before physical damage reduction modifiers are applied, so we have the following reduction from armor. Now endurance charges and other additional physical damage reductions may be added, for a total of 26% physical damage reduction, resulting in a reduced physical hit of the following. After this, we then consider damage taken and apply our final layers of defense. Here we will be looking at reducing the damage further with Fortify and Arctic Armor. As Arctic Armor is a less damage taken, its reduction will be multiplied against any other damage taken. After applying these buffs, we will have the final damage taken. A quick side note on the reduced and less damage takens. As the reduced and less damage takens are applied at the end of the defensive layer chain, this means that they will effectively reduce a smaller total percentage of the damage that you take than they read. So Fortify will not reduce a flat 20% of the original incoming hit. Rather, it will reduce 20% of the incoming damage from hits after mitigations such as physical damage reduction and elemental resistances have occurred. This doesn't mean that it isn't strong, this just means that it will grant you a variable amount of relative reduction based on your other reductions. In this example, since we have damage shifts and a fair amount of physical reductions, Fortify only reduces all of our incoming hit damage by about 8.2%. However, if you have absolutely no incoming elemental damage or resistances, physical damage reduction, or damage shifts, then it would reduce up to a damage cap of 20%, as it would be the only damage reduction in the chain. Now here is our final damage. Since we do not have any energy shield or mind over matter, we will apply all of this damage to our life pool. As you can see, we only lose about a third of our life rather than dying to a combined 8,000 damage hit. Defensive layers in Path of Exile play a very important role in keeping your character alive. Even though you may not want to invest in them as they might be boring or do not increase your damage, it is very important to consider and integrate as many layers as possible. Now remember, I did not mention all of the defensive mechanics in the guide, just the main layers for damage prevention and mitigation, not for recovery of lost resources. Pairing prevention and mitigation with forms of recovery such as life regeneration and or life leech is very powerful, as you are able to recover from failed preventions or heavy hits. I hope that you have learned a few things and picked up a couple of ideas for how to strengthen your character. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, Exile.